Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. In order to stop the continuous pillage of cash allocated to local government councils across the country by state governments, the federal government is giving local governments financial autonomy. Starting from June 1st, the federal government has mandated that all LGA allocations go straight to their respective bank accounts, making them independent of state governments. Joining us this morning to speak on this latest development and its effects is public affairs analyst Wale Oluwade. Good morning, Mr. Oluwade. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Tundu. Thank you for having me.
So, what is your assessment of this directive by the NFIU, Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, and its likely effect on local government autonomy?
Well, I would say it's a step in the right direction, but we're not there yet. It's not yet uhuru, as it were. Simply mandating that the funds meant for local governments be paid directly to their accounts does not in any way ensure autonomy for local governments in Nigeria. Now, the local governments ideally should be the third tier of our government or governance architecture in Nigeria, and the same constitution, in Section 7, subsection 1, that talks about the creation of a local government, that is democratically elected. Also, in several other parts of the constitution, seems to have circumscribed, tied the hands of the officials of the local government. So, just making a policy pronouncement on funds releases to local government does not in any way suggest that we now have autonomous, or that the local governments are suddenly, free of the overbearing influence of state governments and even the federal government of Nigeria. For instance, how do local governments get elected in Nigeria? You have an institution called the State Independent Electoral Commission. That is the creation of the state houses of assembly, and the members of the SEAIC, are nominated or appointed by state governors. So if you have a state governor and the state house of assembly having such a direct influence over, the composition, the structure, the management, the administration, even the functions of the local councils, it goes beyond, just financial autonomy. Another aspect is even the minimum threshold in Section 106. The Constitution provides a minimum threshold qualification for anyone to be chairman of a local council or councillor. And what is the minimum qualification required? Post-primary education. That is someone who has attended primary 6 or has O-level certificate. Is that the personnel, the kinds of people they are entrusting with huge sums of resources? People who have no administrative skills, no management skills, no leadership skills, nothing of such about governance. And now, where we borrowed this idea of presidential system of governance from, the local government ought to be, that's the third tier, and that is the closest to the grassroots. That is where you have real governance, being delivered directly to the people at the grassroots, where real development, ought to take place. So if you have people who have no skills, who have no capacity, no leadership, no management, no administrative skills, and they are barely literate, so how do you anticipate that there would be development, at that level of the governance structure? I don't think just making a pronouncement, there's no silver bullet, and that brings me back to the issue of restructuring, or constitutional amendment that has been proposed by eminent scholars, leading lights in constitutional law, in governance, people like Professor Akin Oyebode, Professor Ben Nwabueze, even former APC interim chairman, Chief B.C. Akonde, I remember, wrote a blistering paper, about the debacle of the 1999 Constitution, which more or less is a copy of the 79 Constitution. So I think what we need is beyond making policy pronouncements on local government finances. We need to have, go beyond that and do wholesale. For instance, what is the federal government doing with 52.6% of the revenue sharing formula? What does the federal government need? 42 ministries or 36. The constitution is able to have 36 ministries.
Wale.
6 other ministers, from the 6 regions. Yes, Ruben.
Yes, Wale Oluwade. I like the point you were making about constitutional amendment. In this regard, there's also a constitutional side to it when you talk about the financial autonomy of local councils. Section 162, subsections 6 and 8 thereof create what is called the State Joint Local Government Account.
Joint Local
Government State Account, right? Will you go as far as saying that that section of the Constitution should be expunged and that the Constitution should say specifically that the allocations to local councils should be direct rather than making states trustees of that account?
I agree with you, Ruben, and that's why even this pronouncement by the federal government, I'm at a loss because I'm wondering, can the federal government unilaterally make a policy pronouncement on a constitutional, issue? Because what a governor in Nigeria or a state in Nigeria can do, is just to go to court, go to the Supreme Court for an interpretation that does the federal government have the powers to do what they've done? And I don't think, because it's a constitutional provision, so until the Constitution is amended, for me, number one, this section 162 that talks about the state's joint local government account should be expunged. I agree with you entirely, but not just that. because if you give money to barely literate, I don't want to say illiterate because that's what they are really. You and I know, Ruben, Tundu, Adesuwa, that who are the people that we currently have at that level of governance structure in Nigeria? They are party. I don't want to be, rude, but they're just, not better than street urchins, thugs. Those are the people that man that level of the governance. They're just party boys. They are people the party thinks, okay, during electioneering campaigns, you did a lot of good jobs, so you go sit down there and then just take whatever we give to you. That is not the ideal. That is not the intention, of that third, arm of government. It is the arm of government responsible directly for development at the critical level, of society. Because the 4th schedule of the Constitution, 1999 Constitution, prescribes the functions, the duties of the local councils, and these are duties that, if we're going to talk about the debacle of misgovernance in Nigeria, these are the items, that the local councils, as prescribed in the 4th schedule of the Constitution, should take care of: waste management, refuse collection, provision of markets, provision of roads, primary health care, education at primary level. That means recruitment of teachers, recruitment of doctors, and the list goes on. But if you have the state government, as overlords, and they've hijacked most of these functions. Because if you have, let's even look at the relation between the states and the local councils. A state like Lagos, for instance, if you look at far-flung places in Alimosho, in Egbeda, in Okoko, and all the rest of that going to Badagry, and then you have a state governor in Alausa, somewhere at Ikeja. How do you know what is going on in those places? If you go to the federal government on the exclusive list, because this same constitution talks about, some of the function of the local councils will be jointly done, with the federal government. What is the role of the federal government in agriculture, for instance? It beats my mind, because the federal government, I do not think beyond policy formulation, and research and development, agriculture should be the exclusive preserve of local governments and the states. Because in the heydays of Nigeria's governance, excellence, in the 1960 Constitution and 1963 Constitution, when the Western region, for instance, built the tallest building in Africa, the first TV station in Africa, embarked on massive education of the masses.
Well, Mr. Oluwade,
from cocoa. The North had agricultural, from granite pyramids. The East had, palm produce, and the Malaysians, the Southeast Asians came and took from this palm produce.
Well, they refer to it as a good old days. Mr. Oluwade, let me ask you, because, you've mentioned Lagos. States like Lagos, Osun, and the rest that have created additional local council development areas. What do you see playing out in this situation starting June 1? Because those still remain alien to the Constitution, as we recognize only 774 local government areas. You also mentioned restructuring earlier. Scrapping of the joint state local government accounts was one of the recommendations of the 2014 National Conference. Do you think that this administration is perhaps itching towards implementing some of those outcomes?
Thank you, Adesua. You know, I remember when Lagos State took the federal government under President Obasanjo to court on the issue of additional creation of LCDAs, local council development areas. And the case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, to the best of my knowledge, you know, agreed with the state government that they had the right to create local governments, but that they remain inchoate. That was the exact word the Supreme Court used, that those new creations, those LCDs, remain inchoate. That is, they are not recognized until, you know, the National Assembly, you know, adopts them as part of the Constitution, because the Constitution prescribes, currently we have 744, you know, 774 local government. That is what the Constitution recognizes. So if Osun State or Lagos State is creating additional LCDAs, they need to go to the National Assembly for these new creations, you know, to be brought into the, to be recognized by the Constitution. You know, now, going back to the issue of this pronouncement by the federal government, I don't think it can actually, they can go, because all it takes is for a state government to go to the Supreme Court for an interpretation that do they have the rights to do that unilaterally without that section of the Constitution amended. And I mean, I think since the Constitution is very explicit on it, the Supreme Court is going to find in favor of the states. Now, beyond that, what we are doing, because you also said, I mean, does it not seem that the presidency, you know, is beginning to do maybe piecemeal implementation of the 2014, the outcome of the 2014 conference? You know, why do we have to do piecemeal? Why does it seem like we are afraid to do what is obvious, what is so clear that we need to do? You know, this Constitution, I mean, you know, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I've read a lot from Professor Mbaweze, Professor Akin Oyebode, and so many other eminent, you know, lawyers. This Constitution, this piecemeal patch that we seem to be doing is not going to work. We need to have wholesale, you know, revamping of this Constitution. And a critical aspect of that, I just mentioned to you, let's even take, for instance, that the states don't go to court. They allow the federal government, you know, pay directly to the local government. And I'm asking you, you know, Ruben Adesua, to do that. The kinds of people you have in those LCDs or local councils now, are they the kinds of people, even with the 20-point-something, you know, percentage of the federal territorial revenue that they are collecting, are those the kinds of people you want to have these funds at their disposal? Because they do not have the capacity. They lack the skills. They do not have management, administration, leadership skills to manage anything. You know, so this money is, you are going to take this money from the hands of some, you know, I mean, one set of wasters to another, even worse. You know, because where's the development? Where's the growth anywhere? You know, no primary healthcare centers. I mean, the last time I was here, the next day you have Professor Chukwu Onyebuchi, former Minister for Health, who said, you know, that some communities in Nigeria have never seen a qualified medical personnel in Nigeria.
So on the issue of personnel,
what do you have the local councils for?
Mr. Oluwade, on the issue of personnel,
yes,
the quality of personnel manning the local government, that's one issue. But to take you back to your sort of hesitance to embrace this edict by the federal government, what else can the federal government do to rescue the local government from the stranglehold of state governments and also the federal government? Because if you look at the local government autonomy bill, only 9 states have passed it. You're talking about constitutional amendments, which it's obvious that we require. Dr. Abati mentioned Section 162, well, parts of Section 162. There's also Section 7, which mandates the State House of Assembly to legislate regarding the operations and administration of the local government. So it's clear that there's a lack of independence there. Yet, only 9 states have passed the local government autonomy bill. They're not interested. And to effect a constitutional amendment, you need 24 states to pass it. What is the likelihood of that happening if only 9 states have passed this bill? Do you not think that that might be why the federal government is trying this edict to try and circumvent these considerations?
You know, Tunde, the beauty of winning, you know, a second term in a presidential system such as ours. And my comments now is without prejudice to whatever the outcome of the presidential election petition tribunal. I know there are 2 or 3 parties that have gone to court, to seek redress concerning the outcome of the February 23rd presidential election. So my comments is that if President Muhammadu Buhari eventually does get affirmation from the Supreme Court, now he owes nobody. He has no political IOUs to pay anymore. So he can actually call this 9th assembly that will be inaugurated in June, 2nd or so of June. He could sit down with the leadership of the National Assembly. And I also remember at my last session here, I'd said that is why we need a certain kind of leadership to man, because the issues that we face are fundamental, So you need them to sit down at the round table, the president representing the executive, and the leadership of the National Assembly to say, gentlemen, we need to separate, sequester totally, the local governments from the apron strings of the states, and then look at the areas of the Constitution that needs to be amended, the minimum qualification. For me, as someone who is particular about human capacity development, you cannot give what you don't have. So amend Section 106, amend Section 162 that talks about specific subsection 6 that talks about the states and joint local government accounts, expunge that from the Constitution. Amend also the areas that Section 7 that talks about, the states and the state assemblies having oversight over, the conduct of elections and how people in the local councils are appointed or elected. If you do that, you would have totally, achieved a great success. But to go behind the Constitution to do this, I don't think it will fly. So why are we doing this, surreptitiously? Can't we just, go, sit down, do something that can stand the test of time?
Well, Oluwade,
that's what I think.
Quickly, before we let you go, you have raised quite a number of issues. But I'd like you to do an assessment of the guidelines that have been given by the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. The FIU is even talking about sanctions on banks, on local councils that make withdrawals. It's prescribing the mode of withdrawal by electronic transfers or by checks. The NFIU is also saying, look, no local government can withdraw more than 500,000 naira per day. What do you think of these guidelines? And in fact, the NFIU is even saying whoever is in any doubt should approach the CBN and the EFCC. Are we not having a situation whereby the federal government, in defining the scope of control that state governments have over local councils, also trying to do more or less the same thing that the state governments are guilty of?
Thank you, Ruben. I think the NFIU are doing what they are statutorily, mandated to do. They're doing the right thing, but it is not for them to, the amendments that we need, is not for the NFIU. So the NFIU is doing what is right, in my own opinion, because what is happening currently, the policy pronouncement by the federal government is a direct fallout of, reports, feedbacks, from the NFIU that currently, the way it is structured, the way it is being operated currently, the states and the states' joint account of local governments, and that is being managed by the states and the local governments, it's nothing but a cesspool of corruption, grand corruption. What is going on right now, the number one access to corruption, to grand theft of state resources is that local government, account. So the NFIU, in coming up with these policy guidelines, is right, because most of the funds that even the state governors, release to the local council chairmen do not, you'll be shocked, Ruben, does not go through the financial system. It's cash. It's cash. I heard of a story, and it's not been refuted, where a state governor collected over 100 billion naira. The money was brought cash, by a bank to the state governor's office, and part of that money was to be given to said, okay, it's for local government. Why do you give them money in cash? And there's no trail, to know what the money is being used for. So, of course, we need to deepen financial inclusion at that level also, because if you go to most of our states, they're just, the ideal sense of rural is what you find in Nigeria. Because, I studied abroad, and the first time I was going to Sheffield, my university and they said, this is a village. I said, this one a village. You should come to Africa and see what a village looks like. Because I did see Sheffield as a village.
Thank you very much. Wale Oluwade, thank you very much. This has been quite interesting. And let's hope that when local councils have their financial autonomy as proposed and they are properly recognized as the third tier of government, according to what is in the Constitution, that we'll have greater accountability and transparency on the part of the leadership at that level of government. Thank you very much.